Welcome to the Manifestation and Money podcast, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Jen. It's great to be here with you and have this conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to have a fellow Canadian on the podcast that is over in my side of Canada, because we have our main listener pool is Canada in the US, but I find it's always fun just to hit straight on with another Canadian. So can you share a little bit with the listeners about who you are and what your story is?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm an entrepreneur. I have a small business located in British Columbia in Canada on the West Coast. It's an accounting, bookkeeping, and advisory firm. So we support small businesses in having accurate, detailed financial records. And that includes services as the foundation is basic bookkeeping, all the way up to fully outsourced accounting departments, fractional controller, fractional CFO kind of advisory support. It really just depends on the business. And my story in that, like I never dreamed of having an accounting firm. I went to school for that and I worked in corporate for many, many years. And then I found myself with children and struggling to figure out how I was going to have this job and be a mom and a wife and all the things, and ended up kind of going out on my own. And I learned that being a business owner is very different than being an employee. And even though I was an accountant and I knew the math of stuff, I didn't understand all of the aspects of owning a business. And along the way, I've had to learn a lot about business ownership and how to manage my personal finances, improve my personal relationship with money. I found that I had a story of survival around money, of scarcity and fear, never having enough, a feast or famine kind of cycle. And so I had to kind of figure that out. Did a lot of work on that and realized that this was something that in my business, I can easily create an amazing strategy for a client to get out of debt. But if they're sitting in that fear, scarcity, and lack relationship with money, it doesn't matter what strategy I give them. They're just going to create more of that. So I had to really learn how to work with clients and help them change their mindset, help them change their outlook, and help them understand themselves and their relationship with money. So I have a few kind of tools I use to help them do that. And that's really what brings the change for people. The only other thing I would add is that I created my business, and lots of people create their business because they think that it gives them freedom and it's going to create wealth for them. And businesses or a job don't create wealth, they create cash flow. And we have to be able to use that cash flow to create wealth and hopefully shift the trajectory of wealth for future generations. And so that's what I'm really passionate about doing with my client.
You bring in a piece to the equation that I'm really intrigued about. A lot of accountants, it can just be black and white money, right? Like just black and white here, the money's here, it's either there or it's not. So for you to weave in people's relationships with money and what they do with their money, what are some things that you work with on people? Because right now, honestly, like in this world, people are seeing their dollars vanishing quicker because of inflation, right? So that's kind of bringing people to a feeling of lack and scarcity, where the flip side of that coin is the governments are printing money as fast as they can. So there isn't a scarcity of money, but people are feeling that way, right?
Well, yeah, how can you not when like a cauliflower is $12 or whatever, right? Like it's crazy. I was recently at the store and I have a Keurig and I get the Tim Hortons little pods, and they used to be $19.99 for 30 and they're $24.99 now, right? That's like a $4 difference kind of thing, right? Like how did that happen overnight, right? So I get it with inflation and everything that's going on in the world. It does seem like things are costing more. And for some people, it might seem like, well, I just need to go out and make more money. But more money isn't the answer. It can help, but more money can create more problems as well. The tools that I use is understanding what you believe and why you believe that, right? So I'll use myself as an example. I had a feast or famine relationship with money. So there would be times in my life where I had a lot and when I had none. And that is a direct result of how I grew up. I grew up in a commercial fishing family. And when there was fishing, we had lots of money. And when there wasn't, we didn't have any, right? I kind of adopted that as like, that's just how it is in life with money, right? As a little kid, it just gets imprinted in your subconscious. That's just how it is. And so you act accordingly. I'm not a commercial fisherman and I never have been. But in my life, I artificially created that through debt. So I would rack up a credit card, have no money because I'm trying to pay it off, then have money because I paid off the credit card and I had extra money, right? And so we can artificially create these things because that's our comfort zone in our subconscious. So it's understanding what you believe, understanding why you believe that, right? Where does it come from so that you could address it, right?
Yeah.
And then another aspect I use, another tool, is human design. So human design is based on your birth details, when you were born, the time, the date, and the location. And it's like your blueprint. So for me in human design, I'm a generator. And there's aspects to that that I see in my life that if I lean into the strengths of that, I can create money really easily, right? And then one of the biggest like game changers with my clients is like, along with human design, is using sacred money archetypes. So for anybody who hasn't ever heard of that, it's a system of 8 archetypes that was developed by a woman named Kendall Summerhawk in the 80s. And it's very powerful because our brains are able to relate to an archetype, an image, an outline of this kind of scenario around money, our how we relate to money, our gifts, our strengths, our weaknesses, all of that. So there's 8 of them, and we have all 8 within us, but we're very strong on some. So I tend to work with my clients' top 2 to 3 archetypes. It becomes so crystal clear to them how they're operating with money when they understand their beliefs. They also understand what they want, and then they understand themselves through their human design and their money archetypes. Becomes really clear the path to more money. Doesn't matter if you have your own business, you're an employee, you're retired, none of that matters, right? So a really quick example to demonstrate this is my top archetype is called a romantic, and a romantic lives in the now. So they like to spend money now. They're not worried about the future. They're not worried about saving. They actually struggle to save. They find it very constricting to think about saving. And the reason isn't because they don't like saving, it's because that everything's always worked out for them, right? Like magically, it's always worked out. There's always been enough. So they don't really worry about the future. They trust that it's all good. It'll all work out. So for me, I didn't have a retirement plan because I wasn't worried about it. Oh, it'll work out. I don't know, right? Now, my ex-husband is what's called an accumulator. Accumulators live in the future and they don't want to spend money in the now. So we were like the opposite ends of the spectrum. So in our relationship with money with each other, I would want to spend money now. Let's go on holidays. Let's buy this thing. Let's do this stuff. He wouldn't want to do that. He'd want to save our money. He was like, and I used to call him like a penny pincher. He'd squirrel away all this money. Now, my interpretation was often, he doesn't care about us, like our family, he doesn't care about our now experience. He's just wanting to save for the future. He doesn't want to enjoy now. I want to enjoy now. What if something goes wrong? We don't have a future, right? Let's enjoy it right now. For him, he would be like, she wants to spend all her money now. Maybe she thinks we were not going to be together in the future.
Ooh.
Right? And so we didn't know this about each other, and we didn't talk about it either, right? Because we didn't know it. If we had known this, we could have had different conversations. We could have had more productive conversations, and we could have understood each other better and not made these assumptions about what was going on with each other. And I don't know, maybe we would still be married because like a lot of people, money was one of our biggest points of contention in our relationship. Right?
Yeah, and you could see that you had such polarizing views on it, and I can see
Totally.
how your interpretations aren't meshing. You're just bouncing off each other,
Totally.
assuming things. And for these money archetype, is it kind of like taking one of the personality tests where you
Yeah.
get it really clear? So you go, you're answering like a series of questions, and then it comes back and
Yeah.
you scored the highest on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's
I can give you
fascinating.
the link for that and you can share that with your listeners.
Yeah, I would love that
Because
because
it's
I'm intrigued. Now I want to run it on my husband too and me
totally,
because I think the more you can just have clarity around, like we read the love languages book.
yeah, it's like it's very similar to love languages, right? If you know somebody loves gift giving and you love words of affirmation, like you have to be able to meet the other person where they're at. I have had my kids do it so that I understand them. I can support them in achieving their goals. My eldest daughter is in a serious relationship. I'm like, you and your boyfriend need to do this. You need to understand each other now,
Mhm.
right? Because he's very much a saver. And for somebody who's not, that can feel very frustrating. And then if we're in frustration, we're in that survival part of our brain. We're not in that empowered part of our brain. And like you said, it's like hitting up against a wall all the time. That doesn't feel good. And eventually you're just going to try to get out of it because it's not meeting your needs, right? So useful for everybody. To me, it's such a game changer.
Yeah, every time I do a podcast, I'm always blown away at just some different tool or some different insight. And I'm like, well, now I have to go check out this thing, right? And
Right?
sometimes they don't resonate. I try them and they don't resonate. And other times I'm like, this is a keeper. This is going into our everyday. And the more I dig down to paths of money not being black and white and people having this relationship with money, right? Or it's deep-seated beliefs that our parents have that have been pushed onto us. Money sounds like such an easy, tangible currency, but there is so much more that surrounds it that is affecting how we're dealing with it. And it's eye-opening the more conversations I have. So I'm curious, you said people in business, so whether people are grinding out at a job or whether they're entrepreneurs doing their own thing, you said at the end of the day, it comes down to the cash flow and what people do with their money. And what do you feel are some proactive ways that people can be handling their money?
Well, especially in today's world, right? Any money sitting in your bank account is basically losing money at this point, right? We're not getting interest at a rate that keeps up with inflation. I'm not an advocate for saving in the traditional way. I think it is good to have a rainy day fund or an emergency fund that's semi-liquid, right? If you get an offer for a high yield savings account or something with a really good interest rate, it's great to put your kind of rainy day fund in that, as long as it's semi-liquid, like you could pull it out if you needed to with minimal penalty or no penalty preferably. So in Canada, that would be something like a TFSA. Usually I wouldn't overfund anything like that. Now, I will say I'm not a financial advisor, right? So I own an accounting firm and I look at numbers not from a financial advisor perspective, but I'll share with you my personal opinion, right? A really useful tool for anyone, if they got a job, a business, doesn't matter. A really useful tool is called an overfunded whole life policy. And if people haven't heard of that, they should ask their financial advisor about it, because an overfunded whole life policy is basically like creating your own bank. And the sooner you start it, the better. So I created one for each of my kids because they were underage. I had to be the owner of it, but it's basically a life insurance policy on them. And I'm overfunding it. So I'm putting more than the premium in there. And then you can borrow against it in the future. You can also borrow against the value of the insurance policy.
So this is a
And then
Canadian tool you're talking about.
it is, yeah.
Fascinating, because I had a guest on a while ago that was talking about something similar in the United States. And I was like, ooh, he didn't know if we had something like this up here that exists.
It is not widely known. Okay.
Okay.
So if you need a financial advisor, that I have a few in my pocket that know of this,
Mhm.
It is not standard practice. It's fully regulated by CRA. It's not something that's been used a lot by like the general population in Canada. It's something that's been used quite frequently in the United States. They've had this going on for a gazillion years, right? The advantage is that the overfunding that you're putting into the policy is invested and it's creating a dividend. So not only are you overfunding it and you've got a cash value sitting there, it's an accumulating cash value because you're getting dividends on that, right? I think in the first year of my policy, I had about a cash value that I could take out of about $14,000. That's a lot in 1 year, right? Now, the longer you have the policy, the more you can borrow. Kind of it opens up your lending capacity on the actual policy amount. So my policy is $1 million. And every year that goes by, it opens up a little more of that $1 million. Because at the end of the day, when I die, they're just going to keep whatever if I borrowed from it, they would just keep that and pay out the difference, right? It's a great tool. You have to get a financial advisor who knows about it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, if somebody needs a connection on that because their financial advisor doesn't, then I'm happy to provide. I've got a few people and I can give those to you for sure. But the biggest advantage in that is you're basically creating your own bank.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So for my kids, the reason I did one for my kids is that by the time they get to be 25, between 25 and 30, they will probably have enough in there to borrow at least a partial down payment for a home.
Wow.
Right? If you did it if I had done this when they were really young, because you can do it from the moment they're born, basically, right? They would probably be able to borrow enough to have their own mortgage, like fund their own mortgage.
That's
You wouldn't even need a bank, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me just get clear on this. So you're overfunding the policy, which the policy is also an investment, so it's making dividends on it. But then that policy is continuing to grow and making the dividends, and you can borrow against it as if it was a piece of property or something because it has the cash value to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can borrow the cash value, absolutely. But the more every year you open up a little bit of the payout amount, right? So in my case, the payout amount was $1 million. Every year I can borrow against that $1 million, a little bit more every year. So if I had the policy by now for 20 years or 30 years, I would probably be able to borrow up to probably the $1 million at this point, plus the overfunded cash value, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in that scenario, you could probably buy yourself a house somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe not in Vancouver, but
probably in my hometown.
Right? Totally, right? And then you don't need a bank for a mortgage.
Interesting.
Right? The term they use in the industry is bank on yourself.
Hmm.
So it's a bank on yourself policy.
Neato. I'm excited that there is an option in Canada because
Yeah.
I was intrigued by the US version of it. And I was like, oh, bummer. Because a lot of times across the line, even though we're connected, they have a little bit different policy and procedures that we don't necessarily get to take advantage of on this side.
Yeah, totally. And then the other thing to consider, and people need independent advice on this, but is considering putting things into a trust, right? Again, trusts are more used in the United States than they are in Canada, but they're becoming more frequent. Having your property in a trust, having your all of your assets, even your life insurance policy in the trust protects it from capital gains tax. It protects it from inheritance, if a province has inheritance tax and stuff. So there's
let's dig on that for just a minute, because again, my mind is just, my context just keeps expanding here. So you can put your assets essentially into a trust and that protects it. Like when I think of trust, I think of, well, like trust fund babies, and some super wealthy person has put together a trust. In my head, I don't know why I'm assuming it's like somebody's multi-million-dollar bank account. So you're saying it can actually be assets that are like
any asset,
an umbrella. Interesting.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. And that can shelter you from a lot of tax, right? Mm-hmm. It can pass property between family members without paying any property transfer tax, for example. Right. It can save you some money, but one of the biggest advantages is that it can make things a lot easier, right? It's a bigger conversation probably, but like this is about creating like wealth for your family, like generational wealth, right?
Yeah.
And that's how really rich families have done this, right? That's how like Jim Pattison has done this. And it's available to all of us. Like we don't have to be the gazillionaire. Like the guy who works at TELUS could do this kind of thing, but we're not educated on this. And it all comes back to our relationship with money, right? Being empowered, asking questions, getting the right advice, getting the right people on your team. I always tell people you need a really good accountant, an amazing strategic financial advisor, and a good lawyer. And if you have those three people, you can completely shift the trajectory of wealth for your future generations. But you have to build a team, and that team has to be collaborative, right? So the accountant and the lawyer and the financial advisor, they have to work with you as a team to achieve your goals, not their goals. A lot of times I have friends or clients and they're working with a financial advisor, and the financial advisor is just selling them the product that gets them the highest commission. That's the financial advisor's goals. It's like going to the bank and asking them, what should you do with your money? Of course, they're going to tell you to put it in the bank, right? They want to use it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I always say, go to an independent financial advisor, and you want somebody who has fiduciary responsibility. So it's not about what's paying them the commission. It's about achieving your goal. So that helps a lot.
The bigger picture. I feel like you've opened up so many rabbit holes that I'm going to be chatting with Google when we get off our call here. Just
right.
Like, okay, I need to check into this, and this. I want to give you a chance here to let the listeners know where they can reach out to connect with you and get more of your wisdom and hear about your podcast and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, they can follow me at michellebcooper.com. All the social media is Michelle B. Cooper. My business is Alchemy Accounting and Bookkeeping, which is alchemyaccounting.ca. Yeah, I talk about money all the time. And it always comes down to our relationship, right? Being in that empowered seat, asking powerful questions, and building the right people around you.
Yeah.
And I'll give you the link for the money archetypes as well, because that will be really useful for your life.
I will link all of this stuff in the show notes for people, just so they have easy access to you and all of your wisdom.
Thank you so much. What a good conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me on the show today, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.